All right, so I am about to absolutely blow your mind right now because over on Fox News, Greg Gutfeld, a self proclaimed comedian on Fox News' The Five show, actually had a semi decent take when it comes to the drug war and the need to legalize, tax, and regulate drugs in order to solve the epidemic of overdoses here in the United States. So let's go ahead and jump into this little debate here. Don't get me wrong, he's not 100% on the mark, but even the fact that he's like 50% on the mark is, better than you could say for most Fox News segments. So let's go ahead and jump into this real quick.
All right, first, Greg Gutfeld, drug workers, is that the new migrants? We don't call them.
I don't know.
I
don't think it's as glamorous. I mean, do you go to a car worker instead of a car dealer? You know, when you go to a casino, they're called dealers, not workers.
They're called sex workers, not sex sellers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, I think you should target the cartels while you negotiate with them. And I also think you got to legalize drugs. I mean, the only way you're going to have quality control, like prescriptions, and the only way you're going to stop fentanyl poisonings would be to legalize these drugs, which people want. The problem isn't with the dealers. The problem is with us, right? We're the demand. They're just the supplier. You know what? You want to know who the drug dealers are? Snoop Dogg was a drug dealer. Jesse. Jay-Z was a drug dealer. 50 Cent was a drug dealer. Mark Wahlberg was a drug dealer. Tim Allen. And you know who opened this segment?
Who?
Kid Rock was a drug dealer. Wow. So I'm telling you, there's a lot of hypocrisy. This is an artificial stance.
Okay.
There's a lot of hypocrisy from Republicans. What do they love and preach to everybody? Capitalism. What do they hate? Regulating it. What is the drug market? Unregulated capitalism. A lot for the first rung onto that ladder of capitalism often is drug dealing for blacks.
Well,
how dare you?
They legalized drugs in Portland, essentially, and everyone's dying and sleeping on the streets.
Okay, I'm just going to ignore what Jesse Waters said there for a second to sort of like spoil the well in this conversation about Portland and all of that. But let's just pause there for a second, okay? Obviously, at the end, Greg tips into the territory of just giving some mild racism there, some sort of like subliminal, not necessarily subliminal racism there when he says that like, okay, drug dealing is just the first step on the economic ladder for Black Americans. Okay, we're going to put that to the side. Obvious, racism aside in that conversation. The stuff that he was saying before that was 100% correct. What was the essence of the point that he was just making? He's saying that there is a demand for some of these illicit drugs, and therefore simply mass incarcerating the American people, charging them for petty drug crimes, and trying to target aggressively the drug cartels is not going to actually solve the core root of the problem, which is on the user end in many circumstances. Now, there's a multitude of different ways where you could go about addressing that as an issue, depending on which drug you're talking about. With something like marijuana, you should just completely legalize it. Many states in the United States have already legalized marijuana. It's become like a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's whole conversations that we could have about how that industry should be developed here in the United States. With other drugs that are more dangerous or potentially life-threatening, you can have different sorts of regulations, you can have different sorts of policies that address them outside of just treating it as an entirely criminal issue and just continuing to throw people in jail for petty, nonviolent drug crimes and continuing this cycle where you're not actually addressing the fact that the drug suppliers, okay, the cartels, if you will, or whoever is supplying the drugs that come in here in the United States, you're not addressing the issue that there is a demand for that, and so you can bomb the shit out of however many drug cartels you want to, and there will always be somebody to fill their place because there is money to be made, there is a market for it, and that is just the reality. So on that front, it's kind of refreshing, especially on Fox News, to hear somebody openly say that, especially as we have had Republicans like Donald Trump himself and Marjorie Taylor Greene and plenty of other ones as well, who are just basically casually insinuating that we should go to war or invade Mexico in order to bomb the shit out of the drug cartels, which, as Greg points out in that clip, or at least implies, this is not going to actually be effective in the long run. So it's a little bit refreshing to hear this kind of a different take from these kinds of ghouls, but don't worry, we're going to get to Jeanine Pirro's response here in a second, which is perfectly as expected, deranged as you might think would come from a type of conversation like this. But just on the merits, in terms of like, what are the policies we could do to reduce overdose deaths while simultaneously creating an industry that could make money and legalize this and also reduce the prison population, Greg is not necessarily that wrong. Now, would he be in favor of promoting addiction treatment, universal healthcare, mental health care in this country, allowing for actual policies that have been demonstrably successful around the rest of the developed world in order to address drug addiction as an issue? Probably not. I'm not going to be that generous. He's probably not in support of many of those policies that would be needed in order to fully, in a holistic way, address the drug epidemic in this country, as they call it. No, obviously, he's nowhere even remotely close to being perfect on this issue. But again, even just having these conversations on Fox News is completely different from anything that I've heard them talk about, okay? And this is not even something that the upper echelons of the Republican Party are in support of. This is not something that most political pundits are in support of. They are pretty much going full speed in the opposite direction, saying we should execute drug dealers, we should bomb Mexico, all of those different things. So Greg, on this specific issue, kind of seems to be the most reasonable of the crowd. But let's get to the deranged response here from Jeanine Pirro. Let's see what she has to say on this issue.
Do you agree that we should legalize drugs, Judge Jeanine?
Let me ask you a question. What do you think my answer is to that? Absolutely not.
Okay.
We can't legalize it. And look, here's the thing.
The drug war is working great.
Well, no, because we're not doing everything we need to be doing.
Arrest more people?
No.
Because they're seeking oblivion?
No, what we need to do is we need to close the border where 90% of the heroin and pretty much all the fentanyl comes through. We need to make sure that we've got, look, Joe Biden wants to sanction and financially crippled. We heard this drug czar saying they're going to know that we're serious. Are you kidding? We need to designate them as foreign terrorists so that we can go after them the way we go after terrorists. We need to have military.
Right, because the war on terror has been just such a wild success. I mean, imagine saying that. Imagine saying that after 2 decades post 9/11 of the war on terror, where we spent trillions of dollars to bomb the shit out of innocent men, women, and children committing widespread war crimes, okay, wasting all of these resources just to end up essentially where we began, okay? Imagine looking at the entirety of the war on terror and saying, yep, that went super well. Let's do that again, but this time with Mexico, one of our largest trading partners in the entire world, who also happens to be on our southern border. Now, keep in mind, these are the same people who will complain that people who are fleeing bad situations in their own country in Central and South America, that they are coming to the U.S. southern border. She thinks it would be a good idea and wouldn't exacerbate the amount of people coming to the U.S. southern border if we started a war with Mexico. Okay, that's her actual position here, right? But they continue here.
Strikes, and I don't care if President Obrador in Mexico thinks we're rude or thinks it's an insult that we would consider doing this.
No. It's not an insult. It's a declaration of war. There's a pretty sizable difference there, right? You can't kind of just decide on a whim to go bomb a sovereign country without their permission. That's not really how geopolitics works. I mean, if you're the United States of America, if you're the global empire, you can kind of sort of do that and kind of sort of get away with it, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be disastrous consequences, including the complete and utter breakdown of any relationship that we have with Mexico, which again is one of our top 3 trading partners in the world. Okay, what she is proposing here is absolutely deranged at any level that you could possibly look at this issue here.
The truth is that if you've got 100,000 people dying, we're in a damn war right now. And these kids are not dying because they want to take fentanyl. They're dying because they want to take maybe an Adderall, or maybe they want to take an oxycodone. Okay?
That's why you legalize
it. Undeclared war. No, that's not why you legalize it.
That's where you get the control of it. Look, read about Prohibition. The reason why people died during Prohibition was because the alcohol wasn't controlled.
Okay.
Once you control pills, then you know it's an Adderall. Then you know know it's a
make
Xanax.
fentanyl so that it's not lethal anymore?
Fentanyl is legal, by the way.
Lethal.
Yes,
Lethal.
but it's also legal.
I know it's legal. Doctors prescribe
It's also
it.
lethal on the street, but not
it's
lethal when it's prescribed.
Well, it's not
See?
lethal when it's prescribed. Yeah,
Yes,
I
that's
get
my
it. But
point.
here's the problem, is that the kids who don't want necessarily an illegal drug and only want something that's ordinary and that it's in everybody's medicine cabinet end up taking something
Because
like...
it's not regulated, because they get mixed. You're agreeing with me.
I'm not agreeing with you.
Yes,
No,
the reason why
it's
people... Look, I have had 2 friends die of overdoses from fentanyl.
We all have had
For the
friends
same
who
reason
died.
you're talking about.
And you know
They
what?
didn't know they were taking it.
Yeah,
If it was
okay.
legal, that wouldn't have happened.
And you know what?
Follow.
But the truth is that people are the truth is that people are dying of these.
Okay, I honestly, I cannot take any more of that. I do not think, and this is rotting my brain from the inside out, witnessing this conversation, where comparatively to Janine Shapiro, Greg Gutfeld here is coming out like a 5D chess playing absolute intellectual giant in this conversation relative to Janine Pirro. Okay, that is the most embarrassing thing that I have ever seen. If you are going to get schooled, absolutely rolled over by Greg Gutfeld, there's no low that you could possibly go that would be below that as an absolute rock bottom. Okay, but somehow Greg Gutfeld has pulled it off. And again, he's kind of right on this, right? He's talking about, right? She brings up the point. People are taking things like Adderall or some other, medication, and it's laced with fentanyl, and then they're overdosing because they don't know that it's laced with fentanyl. Why is that happening? It's happening because they're obtaining those drugs through illicit measures, okay? It's happening because it is not controlled. It is not regulated. It is not legal, okay? Or at least decriminalized, right? There's this weird misconception that some people, especially conservatives, have when you say, okay, we need to, legalize drugs, where they think like, okay, you're going to have packs of cocaine just sitting on a Walgreens store shelf. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about decriminalizing it so it can be treated as an addiction issue, it can be treated as a mental health issue, or in some cases, again, like with marijuana, it could effectively be legalized in a recreational sense. There are lots of different drugs that need lots of different approaches to them, lots of different policies and regulations. Everybody understands that. But Greg Gutfeld is 100% correct about the reality that the reason why we have so many overdoses in this country isn't because of a lack of hellfire missiles streaming down on Mexican drug cartels, but it is in fact, number one, which he didn't bring this up, but this is true, is number one, due to that lack of addiction services, due to the lack of universal health care, including mental health care in this country, and due to a lack of control measures and regulations that could be in place in order to save people's lives. Okay, so on this front, I have probably never agreed, just in this one short couple minute clip here that we watched, with a Fox host more in my entire life. Okay, I'm not even kidding. Now, I'm not going to watch the rest of this, don't want to spoil it for myself, don't want to hear the rest of his potentially deranged commentary as they go on from here, so I'm just going to cut it off at that. But as a part of that conversation, he's right, and I'm at least glad that some conservatives who are watching Fox News right now may get introduced to those kinds of conversations, because that is the only approach that we could possibly have. And one thing that really stood out to me as a part of his commentary there, his pushback there, was just simply saying, oh yeah, the drug war that we have been waging since about the Nixon administration has just been such a wild success, right? Oh, as Matt Walsh points out here, right? Oh, we just need to build one more prison, or in his case, 50 new prisons, if you have to, in order to lock up everybody who is tangentially associated with the distribution or consumption of drugs here in the United States, right? Just one more prison. It's like the people, you ever see that meme when, people are talking about construction projects in their local area, and they're just building more and more highways and more exits and more loop arounds and all of this shit, and it never solves the traffic problem. But then you have that meme of people just being like, please, just one more highway lane, just one more lane, and traffic will be solved forever, instead of having conversations about public transportation or other means that could potentially actually reduce the amount of people in cars that are on the street to reduce that traffic congestion, right? Same exact conversation here. Matt Walsh is looking at this situation where we have 5% of the world's total population, 25% of the world's prison population, and he's saying the issue here is we are not being aggressive enough in locking up people for petty, non-violent drug offenses, okay? So that's one side of the conversation, but then you have the actual side of the conversation in terms of what can we do? What if other countries around the world prove to be wildly successful in reducing the amount of overdose deaths, in ensuring that people have the freedom and liberation in order to be able to consume drugs that are not necessarily life-threatening or threatening to other people that are around them, right? There's two different sort of angles of the conversation that are happening simultaneously here. You have the absolutely deranged side of it, and then apparently you have people like Greg Gutfeld, who are like the 1 out of 5 people sitting at this panel who actually have semi-reasonable takes on this matter. So, I mean, honestly, credit to him, I guess, to some extent for standing out from the crowd on this one specific issue. But, I mean, again, at the end of the day, the conversation around this, to me, at least boils down to that quote that I've consistently pulled up whenever we talk about the drug war, and which is something that I think if most Americans were aware of, would change their perspective on it. If you go back to the Nixon administration, and this is not my opinion, this is according to Nixon administration officials who helped to usher in the drug war, they openly admitted that the reason that they did that, the reason why they pushed this hyper, a militarized response to drug usage in the United States, the entire reason why they decided to usher in the era of mass incarceration here in the United States was for political purposes. The Nixon administration had two enemies at the time, the anti-war left and the black community, okay, specifically black radicals or revolutionaries, if you will, okay? Those were their political enemies, and they decided we could associate the hippies, the anti-war left, with marijuana. We could associate the, black Americans with cocaine and other drugs, and then we can criminalize them. We can use this as an opportunity to infiltrate and to destabilize their movements and their organizations. That is the entire reason why we ended up with the drug war that we are continuing decades later, okay? That's it. And the same reason applies to this day. That is why we are continuing the drug war. These are essentially, especially for non-violent, drug offenders that are in prison, these are political prisoners, okay? So that's what this boils down to at the end of the day. Now, follow-up question, aside from these right-wingers having this conversation about the drug war, right? Let's circle back to Joe Biden. You guys remember, just a couple of months ago, Joe Biden was talking about how, before the midterm elections, he was going to put together, I guess, this group or this panel that was going to investigate the possibilities of descheduling marijuana from the controlled substances list. What the fuck happened to that? What happened to that, right? This is easily predictable, right? If we could transport ourselves back, we could easily see this coming. And I remember my commentary at the time where I was saying this does not at all mean that Joe Biden has somehow become based and that he's absolutely going to legalize marijuana or something like that. But what happened to that conversation? Okay, we are months and months and months after the fact, and he is not using something that would not only be a demonstrable good for society as a whole, but would also be a massive political win for him, especially at a time where he is losing young people. Young people do not support Joe Biden. Okay, he is jeopardizing his own political chances in the 2024 presidential election, which he just announced for, and I'm going to cover that in a video later today. But, he is not using what is the easiest political W in history, okay? Probably in the history of the country, which would be to just legalize marijuana. Okay, so that's still on the table. We're still continuing the drug war. We are still continuing the militarization of the border. Okay, as long as at the same time as we have all of these Republicans acting as if we somehow have open border policies under Joe Biden. No, he is just as brutal as Republican administrations when it comes to the border. Okay, that's the current situation that we have right now, and we have, I guess, Greg Gutfeld somehow coming out seemingly to the left of Joe Biden on this particular issue. It was definitely an interesting conversation, and hopefully in the future, Fox News, allows for these types of perspectives to be openly aired on their airwaves.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying